family just because they don't like how you've written that story. That's the reality for many journalists in South Africa. The reality for many journalists in South Africa as well, not too many, but some we've seen, is some of them facing even physical intimidation and violence as they do their jobs. But I want to remind you of one story that scared the living daylights out of me. This is in 2018. If you're a journalist and you imagine, working, for instance, in the Middle East, I remember covering the story of Jamal Khashoggi. And that was one of the more difficult stories to cover, because you think about how on a daily basis you're just doing your job. But one day you may very well disappear for doing that job because somebody doesn't like you. And then not only that, your family will never even be able to find solace because the answers for Khashoggi's family still have not come. And the examples that we'll look at today are many, unfortunately. And then as we see growing tension on a geopolitical level, those stories are escalated over and over again. But what is the responsibility of a country like ours? One thing we can agree on about South Africa is it's certainly shown how brave it is this particular year, right? Going all the way to the ICJ to speak out around the war in Gaza and calling it a genocide. The responses to it, of course, have been very polarized, no surprises there. But South Africa's taken a position, and that position is solidarity. But what responsibility then do we have to show for solidarity for media freedom, to allow journalists to be able to focus on the pressures of getting the job right and not just the pressures of actually staying alive as well? So we're going to be having I hope, a heated discussion. I hope a healthy discussion. I hope a respectful discussion as well over the next hour and a half. We'll hear from the German Embassy's head of politics. We also are going to be joined virtually by the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Mr. Kenneth Morolong. We are joined as well by Mr. Sbu Ngalwa on stage. He, of course, is Chairperson of SANEF and Treasurer General of the African Editors Forum, and William Bird, who is Director of Media Monitoring Africa. Can we start with this? Please give them a warm round of applause for making the time. Right, and the Deputy Minister's joined us, but I'm going to welcome onto the stage now Ms. Bianca Dormuth, who's the head of politics for the German Embassy, to open things up.
Thank you, thank you. I will put this a bit higher. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. Thank you for this introduction. I think you set the tone for tonight, what it's about, what it really means. But first, Deputy Minister is there.
Yeah, he's there.
Okay, good evening, William Bird, Sbu Ngalwa. Thank you for being here, for discussing with us. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Media Freedom Festival and to this first evening event. We are, I'm sure you are aware of this, celebrating 5 years of the Media Freedom Coalition with this festival. And building global solidarity is the topic of this festival. You have mentioned it already. You also introduced me, thank you for that. I'm from the German Embassy. Germany is now the co-chair of the Media Freedom Coalition, and I will explain to you later a bit what this means and also what our priorities are. Media freedom and the safety and freedom of journalists are the oxygen in a democracy. Our freedom and our democracies depend on the safety and on the freedom of the media and those who work in our media. So this we should never forget. You know, media freedom for some sounds abstract, but it concerns all of us. It concerns not only journalists, not only people who work for media in a broader sense, but it connects to each one of us. So this is also one aspect of solidarity. We are all concerned when journalists are being imprisoned, put under pressure, restricted in their work due to censorship or, you know, by like harassment online or offline, physical or mental harassment. But we also see a great problem increasingly in mis- and disinformation. So I think our discussion should also tackle that, if you like, because journalists are vital for a democracy because they are the ones who can give people the basis for an informed decision. Like, you journalists are the ones who present facts, who check facts, who present both sides of a case, and not only, a polemic stance for one side, but you are the ones who enable people to take a decision, to inform themselves, to understand what is happening. So, as you said, this puts a lot of pressure on journalists, and on top comes the pressure that we don't want. The professional pressure is one thing, but journalists shouldn't feel pressured by physical harassment, by online threats. Some are killed, many are in prison, currently 547 journalists. So we need to protect journalists. We need to protect media freedom. And this is the idea behind this coalition. It was founded 5 years ago, in 2019. And of course, you can ask yourself the question, if you look at all the initiatives around the world, what do we need another coalition for? There's so many, nice initiatives with, nice names, and nobody knows what they're really doing. So let me explain to you what the idea is and why this Media Freedom Coalition is so important. It unites 51 countries from 6 continents. The idea is to really bring together a global initiative, to not just have it, centered, let's say, in Europe or, in one region of the world, but really see it's a global issue. We need media freedom because without media freedom, human rights go down, liberties go down. So it is an issue for all the world. It is a very broad coalition, and not just, the small usual group of like-minded. We still want to broaden the coalition, so our aim is to get this, make it even larger coalition. I said 51 countries now, we are hoping for more. But another aspect is maybe even more interesting. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative, and this is quite unique. So if you look at media freedom, the addressee is the government. The government has to guarantee it. And in many cases, the government is the one who limits with censorship or restrictive laws or imprisonment the freedom of journalists. So the government is also the one being, watched closely by NGOs and being criticized by NGOs, but in many cases, the NGOs don't have the access to the government. So they can, publish something or protest or whatever. And so we try to, bring them together, to have in the Media Freedom Coalition the countries, the governments, and the NGOs, and legal experts and multinational organizations. So everyone who, from a different perspective, deals with media freedom comes together, and of course the journalists. There's a consultative network of NGOs consisting of 22 NGOs. So this is a quite unique, of course, NGOs will be, with the UN, for example, on various formats, but this is quite unique, and we hope that this really helps to be creative, to be flexible, and to really make a difference. It is also a very flexible structure, so it makes it easy for countries to join. There is no big, barrier. It should be easy to join to really advance the cause, because this is what it's about. So what we are aiming for is a still stronger collaboration between the civil society and the governments. And this is why I'm so grateful you're here. I want to be brief because I'm looking forward to your questions, to our discussion, to also what you will say. But let me conclude with a big thank you to the Presidency of South Africa, the Government Communication and Information System, Media Monitoring Africa, of course, and all the organizing partners. A special thank you to Monchato. Where is she? Ah, yes, because she's leaving the organization after the Media Freedom Festival, I heard. Thank you so much for many, many years of trustful cooperation. We will miss you. I also would like to thank the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, the Campaign for Free Expression, the Association of Independent Publishers, the Press Council of South Africa, the SOS Coalition, and of course our hosts tonight, the Goethe Institute. So please feel free to later ask or raise any topics that are important to you, and thank you for being here tonight.
All right, so we're going to get going, but I just wanted to let you know we're going to have a very brief panel discussion. Then what we'll do is we'll take questions towards the end. And let's make it energetic, let's make it lively. Let's leave here having achieved something and not another talk shop. How many talk shops have you been to? Then you come out and you think, well, we've heard that conversation before, right? Let's try and move the needle if we can today. I want to just give the microphone, if you will, to Mr. Kenneth Morolong, who is the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, who joins us virtually. And I'm going to actually start off with a question for you, DM. And it's the question I'll also hand over to our panelists, but you can have the first bite of it. And that question is, from a government point of view, where do you place how South Africa is contributing to the discussion of solidarity to global media freedom? DM, good evening and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. We wish to convey our greetings to the members of the Fourth Estate. We are delighted by the opportunity to engage with you on this important day, which is quite a historic day in many respects. In the first instance, in the sense that this was a day which was used by the then apartheid government and the former Minister of Justice to clamp down on media houses which were seen to have been reporting on the atrocities that were suffered by our people under the apartheid regime. When the South African government went to ICJ, it did so mindful of the fact that there were atrocities which were meted out against women, against the innocent Palestinian children, but also against journalists. And so this was a clarion call for the world to reject the abuse and attack on the Palestinian people, but also on the journalists. And these are but many other efforts. You know that South Africa guarantees the right to press freedom. It is a hard-won right, and we have created institutions to make sure that that right is not abused. And so we think that we will continue to join many other voices throughout the world to speak against the attack of journalists who are hard at work in exposing the atrocities suffered by the peoples of the world. And so this is the commitment we are making today.
All right, DM. DM, thank you so much for that. Is everyone able to hear me? How's that? Okay. DM, thank you so much for that opening remark. Mr. Ngalu, I'm going to let you take the microphone next, right? And that question is around solidarity to global media freedom. Now, you've got the benefit of actually doing some of this work, not just here in South Africa with SANEF, but also from a continental point of view. And I know that as part of the coalition, they've already got 3 African countries that are part of the Media Freedom Coalition, and we'll talk about those a little bit later, Botswana, Ghana, and Sierra Leone as well. But I suppose there's something to be said about even when we talk about media freedom on the continent, we certainly like to use that broad brush, right, and say, oh, media freedom on the continent isn't where it should be. But you need to look at the pockets of where it's really bad and the pockets of where it is actually looking really good. Burundi, for instance, horrible example of what media freedom can look like when journalists are completely stifled. But lessons on solidarity to global media freedom on the continent.
Thank you, Naledi. Good evening. It's lovely to see a number of familiar faces here. I think I'll start by indicating that in July, actually, SANEF went through a successful AGM where new leadership was elected. I now sit as the Treasurer General of SANEF.
Looking after the monies.
Exactly. Which is a corresponding role that I also play in the African Editors Forum. Now, South Africa has a Bill of Rights which guarantees everyone's freedom, right? Freedom to dignity, freedom to life. And I think that's why for us as the media in this country, and particularly as SANEF, I mean, our motto is that it's about South Africa because we understand that we are guided by this very constitution. And I think that South Africa's approach to issues of human rights and media freedom, we actually have a very good constitution. That is our compass. That should help us, guide us. And in every environment and in every case, we should always be driven by those fundamental principles that are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights. I think the important thing for all of us to understand, and I think this point was made very strongly when we celebrated World Press Freedom Day by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. We actually said that media freedom is not optional. You know, without the media, there is no freedom. And we are seeing that in a number of areas. And I think that as we sit here today, we sit here just a few days after the Committee to Protect Journalists issued a report on the Middle East about the killing of journalists and the targeting of journalists by Israel. And we, as the South African National Editors Forum, have been quite vociferous in actually pledging solidarity with the journalists in Israel, in Gaza, because we believe that the situation is, we all know that the situation is unprecedented. And the fact that you have so many journalists being killed and the impunity, with such impunity, and everyone turning a blind eye, that actually is a dangerous, it sets a dangerous precedent for every part of the world. As you would know that the global West generally has taken that position where they have been, to many countries, a model of what I guess civilization ought to be. But the reality is that the position on the Middle East and how they're actually turning a blind eye is dangerous for all of us. Because if Israel can get away with killing over 120 media workers, and they get away with it, how much more for a Burkina Faso? Who should care? Why should anybody do anything about it? Who will say anything? If the multilateral order through the United Nations, if we ignore such, what does that then mean? Why should anybody care when the ICC summons anyone, right? So we are already seeing regression in some areas. I mean, we know that in West Africa, there was the coups that gave rise to the Sahel states. And in those countries, actually, we have colleagues who have disappeared over the past few months. We have colleagues who have gone into exile because there's the old playbook that dictators, or well, I guess benevolent dictators, as they would want to be seen, that they play where it's an us and them. It's either you're with the people or you're against the people. So you have a situation where journalists are projected as either they are for the government or they are agents of the West. So what this then does is that you are also seeing this in countries like Ghana. A colleague of mine was speaking at the at Africa Check Awards in Ghana, and he made the point about how there have been cases in Ghana of media suppression. And also there's just recently in Nigeria, there was a story of sports reporters being abducted, right? And we're coming from an election in Kenya where the military and the police were directly targeting journalists. So what then this says is that it may not be us today. We may sit here and marvel at the fact that we've got this great constitution and we've got these freedoms that are directed, these freedoms that are guaranteed in the constitution. We have a strong judiciary. But the reality is that once you have such behavior and such an unprecedented attack and killing of journalists in Gaza, it then means that nobody should care. Museveni can do as he pleases. Traore can do as he pleases. Kagame can do as he pleases. Anybody else can do as they please because there are no rules, basically. So I think that's the fundamental issue that we're grappling with here. And I think that the coalition actually did issue a statement, I think in May, when the yes, actually, when the Israeli law which is so-called Al Jazeera law was enacted.
Yes, there was another one just recently in September. Yes.
Yes.
And it has been part of, resolutions issued for like Women's Day and other days, where the situation of journalists in conflicts was addressed, for special days. So not only for specific resolutions, but in general ones as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So also you've got about 50 countries, right, who are part of the coalition. And I believe that there should be more countries who are part of this coalition, because the more you have global solidarity for the media, the better. But I think that this should actually, it would be hypocritical of us to just think that because we've got a coalition, therefore, that then means everything is fine. I guess that the host countries as well, these very countries, should put their money where their mouth, or is it the mouth?
Money where your mouth is, yes.
That's it, that expression. When it comes to issues of media freedom, and not be selective about it. Every life matters. Thank you.
Yeah, a really good point. Thank you. Please give them a warm round of applause. Or him, yeah. William, if you've heard William speak on any media platform, you know that he really doesn't hold back in criticizing particularly the South African media landscape. And I think that, such an important voice. And then there's the question that Smu, you've talked about how, I suppose, fortunate journalists here are in South Africa, right? We were looking at the Media Freedom Index, and I was looking at the data there. No journalists killed in South Africa in the past year, thank goodness for that. But that doesn't necessarily make us touch wood, right? That doesn't necessarily make us the gold standard for media freedom, and I think that maybe you can talk to us about that, right? Where we rate media freedom in South Africa, and then the voice that we need to raise from the global solidarity point of view, because that's essentially where we're driving the conversation. But where do you rate where we are as a country, and if we're having the right conversations? Smu talked about this idea of the us and them, and perhaps later on we'll ask the Deputy Minister as well around how he views, what they call, patriotic journalism versus fact-finding journalism, right? But talk to us. What is your rating?
So I think the MFC offers us a wonderful opportunity to show that thing of two opposite things can be true at the same time. Where the Media Freedom Coalition is a marvelous idea, it's great, and at the same time it can be a complete failure and a disaster if there's no meaningful action behind it, and if the Media Freedom Coalition isn't represented overwhelmingly in future by the Global South. Because until and unless that happens, all the kind of anti-rights discourse and all of those sorts of things are going to continue to emerge and actually progressively take over. On a number of obvious levels, we've got a massively high level of solidarity and media freedom. The fact that we're doing this, all of us together, that we're sitting in a room with all of these partners together, that we can engage robustly with our ministers, with our presidency. People can walk out and say anything they like about the president, and then they don't need to fear that they're going to be arrested or put in jail.
Yeah.
At the same time, however, there are, of course, very, very real and increasingly real risks for journalists being able to do their job. One, the basic model that they have, fewer and fewer journalists are able to be employed. This is one of the biggest risks identified by the Press Freedom Index of threats to freedom of expression in South Africa, right? That idea of news as a public good, the importance, incredible importance of information integrity, the importance of the public broadcaster, all of these things teetering on the verge of collapse day-to-day basis, and that undermines all of the kind of good work that's there. And it's a bit like the MFC, right? In principle, it's a lovely idea, but it has to be backed by meaningful action. We've got, a poster showing 175 lives that have been lost in a year, which is an astonishing thing, and it's like, until and unless there's action and there's consequence for this, and states can't just say we support media freedom. There has to be meaningful action around how they support media freedom. In South Africa, there's a lot of concern, and correctly so in most respects, about the state of whistleblowers being attacked and the consequence for doing their actions. And journalists are frequently the ones that are doing this, and yet we don't then see the concomitant kind of protection and stressing the importance of the role that journalism plays in our society. So yes, we've got a brilliant constitution, still probably one of the best in the world. And we've got a government that, thanks to civil society and efforts by them and the media, haven't been able to, where there have been unfortunate efforts to, undermine freedom of expression, it hasn't happened. So we've got that high level of solidarity, but we need, for this global thing to take off, we need it to be supported by meaningful action, and we need it to be supported by real voices from the global south.
Yeah. Deputy Minister, I'm going to bring you back in here because I think that all of us are curious as to what happens in the Office of the Presidency, for instance, when a story comes out, and the conversations that take place when, a story comes out around what's happening in government. What does it look like? And I ask that question because obviously we touched on this earlier. What is pro-South Africa journalism and what is anti? What is fact-telling and what is what we call patriotic journalism? Is there a conversation in the presidency around needing to improve media freedom, or is it, and let's be honest here, particularly, William just talked about the resources, for instance, that are allocated to, say, the SABC, for instance, the public broadcaster, he used the words, teetering on the brink of collapse. Again, DM, his words. But what's the conversation around the importance of creating a healthy landscape in South Africa, so that even if we do join the coalition, we're good examples to other countries on the continent and abroad. So what is the position of government where that's concerned? Where's the resources going to come in so that we're able to create that landscape? And is there a sense that, there is an us and them, a pro-government media or an anti-government media, DM?
Well, I don't think that sentiment has been expressed by government in its official and documented messaging. I don't think so. We, however, would obviously look at journalists as men and women who are ethical in the execution of their responsibilities. We would be perturbed as government by the proliferation of fake news, which continues to be a threat to our thriving democracy. We, however, believe that journalists must be global patriots who promote global peace, who promote equitable world order, who are committed to fair reporting, and that is why I earlier said that we have put institutions in place so that in the event that these reporting is not balanced, it's not fair, it's inaccurate, there must be recourse for those who are aggrieved by the reports. But the government enjoys a very healthy relationship with the media, and we will continue to strengthen that link because uh, media is a lifeblood of any democracy, and for it to thrive, there must be freedom of press, and the government must be seen to be promoting that freedom of press.
Okay, I want to look at a few themes at the moment and the sort of discussions that perhaps are hot topics, difficult discussions to have in this time, in this era. And Mr. Ngalo, I'm going to bring this one to you first because, or maybe William, I'll let you have it because then Smoo can respond to some of the ideas put forward here. We're having a discussion just outside actually with some of the ladies that are here to talk about just the impact of climate change on any other, second week on the news. We're reporting about some horrible weather event somewhere in the world, and sometimes it's just down the road, right? Sometimes it's just here in KZN. Goodness knows what else is coming up in KZN. And then we're going to ask, is it weather or climate? Which one is it? But it's a constant question. But it seems that even climate is becoming
it's
a difficult...
MK rising.
Is that what it is in KZN? But it seems that even the climate change discussion is a difficult one for journalists. Because you still have those that don't believe it's real. There's those that, here in South Africa, for instance, you mentioned climate change in Africa. Don't be surprised if you cover a story and someone on Twitter comes out or shouts it in your face that, well, South Africa or Africa contributes 4% to global emissions, so don't talk to us about that. So when you talk about climate change, it gets into energy, and you don't want us to industrialize. Woo, it's a difficult touch. It's a touchy discussion. But can we talk a little bit about how difficult that conversation is in South Africa, William? And also lessons that we're learning about how tough climate change discussions are globally.
You just look at an activist like Greta Thunberg, right?
Yeah.
Who is routinely doxxed and harassed and threatened for being an activist about climate change. Elon Musk and Donald Trump have had a go at her because they don't like what she says. And it's the same thing all around the world, right? Journalists speak out, women journalists in particular, a woman with an opinion, basically on social media, will be doxxed, harassed, and threatened. So the environment for journalists. And then when you bring in climate issues, because of the vested, powerful interests that are there, it means not only are they going to be threatened and doxxed for doing their job, which is par for the course, it appears now, but they're going to be threatened and doxxed and harassed and undermined because of the fact that they're talking about an issue that, to most people, is actually quite a sane, logical thing, which is climate change is real, folks. We need to be doing X and Y and Z about all of these issues, and there's a whole range of things, and also because it's not one thing. There's a whole range of issues that need to be addressed when you talk about climate change, because it's not just the weather. It's impacting almost every single thing. Food security, poverty levels, the fact that there are floods one week in KZN, and just up the road you've got droughts all over the place. So and being able to have the expertise and the time and the resources to cover that makes it even harder. So you've entered this spiral where for journalists to cover something that's really complex and difficult, they need the time, they need the resources, and they need the protection to do their job so that they don't get threatened and harassed. But then the moment they do, they're going to be threatened and harassed anyway, which means that your pool of journalists that are able to do those stories is again increasingly small. So recently we saw an excellent piece by Amma about the energy crisis and why we don't actually have load shedding now. And it's the kind of piece of quality journalism you would expect to see or would love to see on a weekly basis. Instead, it's taken months for the journalists to be able to go in and produce that kind of thing. Yeah. And that's just one tiny little aspect of it. Against that, you've got massive, powerful, vested interest lobbies who've got all the money and the resources in the world, it would appear, to attack, undermine, belittle, and demean. And then on top of that heap of excrement, you have the excrementer-in-chief, Elon Musk, who sits there and uses his platform overtly to facilitate mis and disinformation. And in that context, you've got the Media Freedom Coalition, which should in that context be saying, hey, folks, come on now, let's bring these billionaire boys into a room, get them to put their big girl pants on and start to bring some level of order to understanding the value and importance of media freedom. And that's where they should be asserting their power as the West, right, the global North, in pulling the people that are running and ruining half of our information conversations, calling them to order. They're the only ones that can.
Yeah, sure, got away with words. Do we have the resources for that?
There's many things I could say now, and I want to say. The whole idea, I tried to bring this up in my introduction, is that it's not an instrument of the West or the North or whatever you call it, or but that it concerns all of us, and this is why we want this a really global thing and have more partners. So it shouldn't be the South against the West, or whatever kind of antagonism you perceive there, but really something we have a common interest. We have an interest taking what you mentioned, the case of environment. Journalists make the voices of those heard that otherwise are forgotten, like the ones that are poor and that lose their homes in floods. And a journalist can make those voices heard and present those stories and wake up people, wake up decision makers, influence decision-making processes. And this is what media freedom is about, and what we need to protect. So you also mentioned earlier, you want more meaningful action. You want to see that. The Media Freedom Coalition, of course, issues statements, and with nice words and important, commitments and so on. But that is not all. I mean, statements are important. They call, for the respect for, the safety of journalists in conflicts, for ending impunity. They address the issues that you mentioned and that are important, but there's also behind the scenes action. So not all you see and read and hear is all the action. So there's action you don't actually see, but that can be quite successful. Like we are also aiming at strengthening the diplomatic network. This is why I'm sitting here. So we will have behind the scenes talks about journalists, about imprisoned journalists, about cases that worry us. And we have seen cases where this, you cannot prove it, obviously, because no government will say, oh, they came to us, they talked to us, now we let them free. But we have seen, a timely context where you see, okay, wow, something has worked. And this journalist is free again and safe again. I do agree with you, we need journalists who can cover conflicts. This is also about making voices heard, checking information, giving us information, and those journalists in any conflict or war zone need to be safe. They need to get access. Access needs to be guaranteed, and they need to be safe. As safe as anyone can be in a conflict, but this is the goal, and this has to be guaranteed. And where it's violated, where there's an attack, yes, there needs to be action. Action means national or international law proceedings in front of a court. And we call upon that. Yes, this concerns Gaza, this concerns also other conflicts, but of course Gaza is the deadliest conflict for journalists. So you mentioned the resolutions, they have been passed. The coalition was speaking in front of the Human Rights Committee 3 weeks ago. And this is also a concern, I would say, to all of us, that journalists, especially in conflict and war zones, are safe. Concerning environment, to come back to that, actually preparing for tonight, I learned a lot. And I learned one shocking number, which is that in the past 15 years, 44 journalists have been killed because they were reporting on environmental issues. And this really shocks me. It's so important for us. We all depend on that we somehow don't ruin this earth, that it's our living that is concerned. And those journalists need to be able to do their job. We need their information to take decisions, to understand what's going on. And if they are not able to do the job or are afraid to do the job, we are all losing. So this is really very important that they can, show what's going on. um, and give like a balanced view, contradicting all the misinformation and propaganda and lies we hear when it comes to climate change and environment.
Yeah, because I think it's going to be a growingly decisive issue in our country. And I'm going to bring you in, Spoo, as we move on to another theme. One of the DM earlier, when he introduced the discussion, or I suppose started with his first points, talked about the media being the fourth estate, right? Such an important role that we play. And you almost can't talk about media freedom without speaking about protecting democracy and constitutionalism. For some reason, 30 years into democracy, this is becoming quite a difficult conversation to have. Just a few years ago, you had high-ranking politicians saying that the Constitution simply does not represent the majority of people in our country. So talk to me about whether or not that is becoming a tough thing for journalists to deal with. Constitutionalism, democracy, and then how we start to take that conversation further.
I think the reality is that with any country like ours, I know that people always say there's a truism that says history always repeats itself, right? In that people forget easily. You know, you hear this in the conversations on platforms like X, when certain freedom fighters or politicians are called sellouts for one decision or the other. And you can see that actually there are these echo chambers, and they're amplified in a way. I think the threat to our democracy is actually not having a strong independent media which is able to counter the rising and the growing and the powerful forces that are pushing disinformation and misinformation. And the reality is that I think for some people, they think that it maybe it's just some innocuous thing where some misinformed person makes one comment or claim. But the reality is that these are actually deliberate distortions. And in countries that have had elections, like countries like Kenya, we've seen violence, which stemmed from the spread of such disinformation. I think, coming back actually to this question, what you are asking is not unrelated to the issue raised earlier about environmental degradation and climate change. That talks to the lack of skills and investment in newsrooms, right? We do not have journalists. I mean, I only know of Tony Kani since the times when I worked in the Mercury in Durban. Today, he's still probably the foremost environmental journalist in this country, but I do not know of any other up-and-coming Tony Kani in this country, right? I think that is the threat to journalism and to media freedom, and by extension to our democracy. And I think that's why it is important that when we talk about global solidarity, when we talk about media sustainability, when we talk about media freedom, we cannot negate, we cannot just talk about the physical conflicts. The reality is that there's a bigger threat, which is not a finger-wagging politician, but actually the fact that you have the newsrooms that have been hollowed out. I mean, I think the only bit that remains in most newsrooms is probably sport, right? And in some newsrooms you'll find there's a little bit of health, there might be education if you're lucky.
The social issues, yeah.
That's it. But the reality is that with the lack of investment in media, in companies in newsrooms by media owners, you've had that hollowing out of the newsrooms. And I think that actually is the biggest threat, because when you talk about climate change, it's not some abstract or highbrow topic. For the rural people, it's about their food, it's about their planting, it's about the changing seasons, right? There was a time where you know that end of September into October you start planting maize because it's summer. Not anymore, right? So it's actually why it's important to invest in newsrooms and ensure the sustainability of newsrooms is actually creating a pool of journalists who can be able to tell these stories and specialize on issues of climate change so that they can actually be able to break it down to everyone to understand that this is not just about what's happening in Florida. It's about the changing weather patterns in this country. I mean, I got here just after 6 because there was a mini hailstorm where I had to wait it out, right? Is it the effects of global warming or of climate change? I'm sure it is, but I'm not an expert in it. But I think that when we talk about media sustainability, it's not just about saving newsrooms or saving failing media companies. Media companies that are failing, they're failing, their business model is broken, but it's journalism that we must protect, that we need to sustain going forward so that we can be able to have an informed citizenry, but also beyond that, to be able to tell these stories of our unfolding South African story and also the global and by extension the African story as well.
Yeah. I'm going to start opening up the floor in about a couple minutes. So if you'd like to prepare or start thinking about your questions, you're more than welcome to do so. But William, I'm going to let you perhaps ask a question to the DM, if you will. Sbu talks about the hollowing out of newsrooms, and I think about how we've seen such a massive decline in investigative journalism in South Africa. I mean, it's huge. I'm not going to name any broadcasters or any sort of media houses, but go in there and where there were offices that were full of investigative journalists, they're completely empty. But I won't name anyone. But let's talk a little bit about how we protect journalists now, William. There's the example of, do you remember when Clicks had that hair ad about, black women's hair being frizzy or something? And then there was a political party that went to protest outside of the store, Clicks. This was actually in the Western Cape. And remember the argument was around black women's hair. And a black woman happened to be there covering the story as a journalist. And she was shoved around by those that were protesting. And I don't know if that got enough attention. That a woman was shoved and pushed on national television for everyone to see while covering a story that, impacts people that look just like her. Was there enough said? Is enough said when things go wrong with journalists, William? Is enough done?
Short answer, no. We saw in the lead up to elections, journalists being threatened and harassed, and you don't even see the political parties, the heads of the relevant party coming and standing out and saying, hey, this is unacceptable behavior. We're not going to tolerate it, even though it's a clear breach of the electoral code of conduct. So I think that part of why I hope, and the part of the question to the Deputy Minister is I hope that South Africa will soon be sending a note to the Media Freedom Coalition to say, when can we join? Please send us the membership form. But it is about saying, it's good that we've got the protections, but when do we assert the clear condemnation of journalists that are being attacked? If you think of the journalists that have been attacked and threatened in Parliament, and yet the Speaker of Parliament all too often has not come out and said, folks, this is not acceptable behavior, and made a thing of it when they've got the power and the possibility of doing that. The Portfolio Committee on Communications, they don't come out and say, we need to make sure that we protect our journalists and facilitate them doing their jobs. And then when we are seeing journalists being attacked in different environments, again, part of the role of government is precisely to make sure that they can and do that. So I guess the question for, given his role in GCIS is could it be a standing order? And I understand from some of the fine people there that they do issue a lot of press releases when journalists are being harassed and threatened, but perhaps we can be doing more to ensure that their protection is given a lot more prominence, let's say.
Yeah. So a lot of asks there for you, Deputy Minister, right? Around how government needs to speak out more around the harassment of journalists. Hopefully that being coupled with some action, and you can talk to us about that. And then any keenness or discussion around joining the Media Freedom Coalition.
Well, I think the Media Freedom Coalition is an important platform that must be supported. And I think that conversation is quite important for government to engage in. And I think without making any promises that I have no express mandate of making, there would be such a discussion, and I think it will have to culminate in some action on the side of government. But South Africa is a constitutional democracy. There is a high degree of respect for the rule of law. Our criminal justice system is resilient, and we will protect the rights of all South Africans, especially journalists who are harassed while exercising their responsibilities at work or wherever they are. And we think that there must be condemnation of any act of abuse of journalists, and all political parties should join in that condemnation of work, including party leaders whose members are seen to be harassing journalists or taking journalists in any form of or another. And I think I speak on behalf of government when I say government advocates for the rights and the freedom of the press. And it will be this government that will continue to advocate for the defense and protection of journalists.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. Okay, we're going to take some questions now. I'm actually just going to walk around and bring them to you. You know, when Professor Anton Harbour puts his hand up, it's about to get hot. It's okay, I got it. Prof?
Now you've challenged me. I want to talk to the Deputy Minister and pick up on what William has said, because I don't think we can be satisfied with loose, generalized commitments to media freedom. We need to talk specifics. We released a report this morning on the state of free expression in South Africa, which gives, I think, a strong factual basis for real concern about the many threats we're seeing to our freedom of expression generally. One of those highlighted was the increasing number of slap cases, the use of the law, the weaponization of the law to harass and intimidate journalists and try and make it more difficult, if not impossible, to do their work. It's a global phenomenon, and there's a global movement to act against it, and we're seeing it rise here. We went through many instances this morning of what a concerning phenomenon it is. I want to ask you, if we come to you with a draft anti-slap law that looks to make it more difficult for people to weaponize the law against journalists and activists in that way, would you take a serious consideration of adopting it?
I would literally take it to Parliament as a private member's bill, undoubtedly, because of our long-term commitment to media freedom. We are a country that has never, from time immemorial, I mean, since the establishment of our democratic government in 1994, never sought to undermine media freedom. It was actually Nelson Mandela who reminded us of the importance of media freedom when he took over as president in 1994. And we continue to walk in the footsteps of many other giants. Remember, our own democracy was founded, amongst others, on the grounds of the work that was done through radio freedom and many other platforms. We sought to galvanize our people against the brutality of the apartheid regime. So I can guarantee you that under this government, we will continue to strengthen laws that will give protection to free journalism.
I shall send you the draft shortly. Thank you very much.
Anton, I'll drive you to the Union buildings.
There we go. William, are you in as well? Yeah. Anyone else with a question? Okay. And do give us your name and your who you're with.
Hi, thank you. I'm Karine du Plessis. I work for the Africa Report. I have a question, perhaps, Deputy Minister, now that you're here as well. Question about solidarity with other journalists on the continent. We often sort of look far away when there's conflicts and when there's media repression, but we don't. I don't know. I sometimes feel we lack solidarity at home, and I want to know from you. For instance, what do our diplomats, our ambassadors, do in terms of quiet diplomacy, perhaps, if it can't be sort of outspoken diplomacy? What do they do when journalists have a tough time in other countries? I mean, from traveling the continent, I've realized we are really, really privileged in South Africa with our media freedom laws. We're not perfect, but we have so much freedom. And a lot of journalists elsewhere on the continent really envy us for that. So I'm just wondering if we do see practices elsewhere that are suppressing media freedom. What do we do? And also, us as journalists in South Africa, what do we do to show solidarity with our colleagues? I know a colleague who is in Germany at the moment because he is in trouble at home in his country, and he's there on a short visa to do a course, but it's provided him a break to get away from that. What do we do to facilitate the same in South Africa? I don't know, Anton, I think you might be able to speak to that. But yeah, just solidarity to him. And what do we do to report on stories that are difficult for our colleagues to report on? Zimbabwe, Mozambique elections, Swaziland. What do we as media houses do locally to show that kind of solidarity? Thank you.
DM?
But I think, as you said, that we are promoters of a global peace, of equitable world order, and mission to mission, our ambassadors will continue to engage their counterparts to express our views and concerns on any violation of any kind, including generally on violation of broadly human rights that we experience in the countries where we have missions and where we are able to, from time to time, interact with the ambassadors. So I think that will continue. We will also continue to use other platforms, such as our leadership and our presence in the BRICS community, to really continue to express our disgust at these occurrences where journalists are attacked and harassed. We will also use our G20 presidency next year to talk about the promotion of the global world order. We will do that mindful of the fact that when we advance such messaging, we are also protecting the freedom of the press. We are also protecting the freedom of those who are South African journalists who may eventually land up in other countries to do stories on behalf of their respective media houses. So we think that sense of global solidarity is important to advance media freedom.
Thank you. My name's Roshan Dadu. I'm from the South African BDS Coalition, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions. South African because in Germany, I'm not sure I would be able to be amongst you, as they have recently classified the BDS movement as extremist, and I expect that has an impact also on media reporting, as well as on the movement and the right to boycott, divest and demand sanctions against the apartheid and genocidal state of Israel. Secondly, I just wanted to say, I thank you for the people on the panel who have raised the question of what is happening in Gaza, what's happening to the Palestinian journalists. The banner there somehow conflicts with me in reading Media Freedom Festival 2024 in a year when we've witnessed, it's unprecedented. This is the highest number of journalists ever killed in a war. And so the kind of contrast is rather striking, as was no mention of this in the information on the website or in the information around this discussion about solidarity and about protection of journalists' rights. But I just wanted to quickly mention two things. One, on patriotic journalism. I echo the fact of people who've said the hollowing out of the newsrooms is a real problem and the lack of investigative journalists now. It is a real problem, partly because that means a lot of the media takes word for word Western mainstream media and repeats it point blank, like Reuters reports on what they call the conflict. It's not a conflict, it's a genocide, and so on. Western media is not neutral in the way it's worded, and that reflects not only in Africa, but also when we've been in interviews recently in Nigeria, those same framings, Western framings of, I'm talking in particular of the genocide that's taking place in Palestine, they reflected in our continent when we don't have the capacity to do that investigation. But yesterday there was really excellent patriotic piece, investigative piece in News 24 that exposed the fact of a South African who's fighting in one of these horrendous elite sniper units that's been exposed by Palestinian journalists recently on X. And they had looked into it, they had got the names, they'd got all the details, the background, and that really helps because now we can push the National Prosecuting Authority to investigate, and that's mostly been done by the journalist, and prosecute because they're contravening our domestic Regulation of Foreign Military Assistance Act. So that was, just an example of how journalism and activism, when there is that capacity, can really assist each other in a patriotic way, because this is in defense of ensuring our domestic legislation is adhered to, as well as, of course, of international law, and particularly the findings, the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice. And then I just wanted to quickly touch upon this idea of balance and ask the panel, if you were interviewing Mandela during apartheid, would you insist on interviewing a P.W. Botha or a real strong supporter of apartheid? Would you refuse to interview Madiba unless you could find the balance from the apartheid side? Because that is what is happening also in South Africa. It's happened to me, where we put a press release, it's picked up, it's an interesting story, they call and say, we want to interview you, then they go back and say, oh no, we can't find someone from the other side, and so we can't interview you. And really, it is an apartheid state, that's clear. I think there's general consensus internationally. And so I want to ask that question, whether you would, as journalists, not interview Madiba unless you could find an apartheid supporter of note to counter that. Thanks.
Those are very powerful points. Thank you so much for that. And I think I'm going to let you guys respond to that at the end. And perhaps, Bianca, you can talk to us a little bit about the issue around the geopolitics and where we sit with that. But the question around balance, Sbu, perhaps you can take that one, right?
All right. I think the reality is that the issue of Middle East is actually quite a complex issue that South African journalists, I would argue, do not fully understand. So the easiest way out, also because of how polarized and also how powerful the voices are on both sides of, on the opposite sides of the political divide, perhaps for most newsrooms not to get in trouble, the easiest way is to just say he said, she said, and then the other side said, and then there's some kind of a false sense of balance. And I agree with you that if you interview somebody, it's their story. They're telling their story, and yes, you can fact check it, but not every story lends itself to you having to get the other side. But the reality is that I think for me, it also goes back to the very point I make about lack of investment in newsroom and lack of depth in newsrooms, where you have journalists that are strong enough to put their view across and to actually be able to defend their view. Because if you issue a statement, I can tell you now, in most newsrooms, if you issue a statement as BDS or whoever else, the person who's going to pick up that a press release is probably the most junior of journalists in the newsroom, because somebody must turn it quickly, right? You have to just write a quick story, let's turn it, okay, because we've got a bulletin at the top of the hour. So, and the fundamental things that, okay, I was told to balance the story. So I don't understand this, and these are powerful voices, maybe I need to get the other side. So I think it's not, it talks to the very point I was making initially about the lack of depth in newsrooms and why a strong independent media is actually not a nice to have, but a fundamental feature of a democratic society. I don't know if I've answered your question, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming and also for voicing your concerns. I'm not sure how much German media you actually read or listen to or, watch on a daily basis. But I can assure you there's not one opinion voiced in German, what you call mainstream Western media. There's many different opinions voiced, put, different sides of how to see things, but also very, very fierce arguments, especially on what we've been seeing since 7 October 2023 in Israel and Gaza. And you were concerned about media freedom and freedom of expression in Germany. There's been around 2,000 public demonstrations in Germany on the situation in the Middle East. So, solidarity demonstrations with Israel, but many more also the opposite. So you will see people take their opinions to the street, and of course they're allowed to do this, right? So this is freedom of demonstration, freedom of opinion, this is, but this is also important when we speak about freedom of media. Didn't quite get whether you are a journalist? No. No, okay, I thought so. Or I thought earlier you were a journalist. So we protect the freedom of expression as well as the freedom of media. Of course, there's a line at some point, where it becomes, an offense against another person. Of course, freedom of expression is not without boundaries because there are other people. So this needs to be put in balance. So like hate speech, for example, this is where you reach a boundary of freedom of expression or freedom of media. This is just because in Germany we have this discussion sometimes where people say, okay, but it's my freedom of speech. But if you're offending another person with hate speech or, in a way that becomes like an offense, then this is, the end of freedom of media. No freedom can be without borders, because we live together in a society, and other people are concerned. I did say something earlier on the journalists being killed in Gaza, and let me just repeat, each journalist killed in a conflict is one too many. To just give you a clear answer on that too.
Okay.
Hello, I'm a former journalist who did a lot of twittering as Ziggo Brandberg, and also on the odd radio. I managed to sometimes, infrequently, mostly I'm blocked to get through to the radio because maybe I'm just a boring loudmouth. So there is this element that we don't have a lot of free speech, but we have a lot of stupid speech of people who are very ignorant, who have free access to the radio waves, and they're bringing about false impressions of reality in South Africa about who the land belonged to and currently belongs to and should belong to, for example, and how it should be taken away because capitalism is horrible anyway also, and stuff like that, which is really undermining the essence of democratic societies across the world which are suffering. So what we need to do is not live in an ivory tower here. We must go back to reality, and one of the realities is that we've got total anarchy and crime being committed by our, according to an allegation that's currently circulating, by our premier of the Gauteng, who was party to spending 11 billion rands on a major housing project which is totally collapsed and it's being dismantled. And we see it on Twitter. You can see this thing. And there's kidnappings galore all over the place. And there's other extortions everywhere, and BEE extortions continue, and nothing is happening. Tuli Madansela was a hero who had to save us, and nothing's happened to her outcome of the Zondo Commission. It's still lying there, and we've got new crimes like the student loans, and I'm amazed that the students aren't uprising.
Thank you so much for that. Lots to cover, you see? Lots of work for journalists to do. I'm going to let our panelists have the last bite, and perhaps as we wrap up, William, you'd like to respond to some of the points that have been made by our audience, and then really what we take out of this discussion. I always like to, when we end a conversation, talk about the commitment that we make to ourselves as we leave this conversation. William?
So South Africa is a wonderful place because it's a living contradiction, right? We've got the best things and the worst of things all at the same time. And our news ecosystem is just like that, right? We've got some of the most amazing, incredible, brilliant journalists, comparable with the best anywhere in the world, right? Easily. Like brilliant investigations, brilliant, all sorts of things. They can be the best, and they can also just be completely crap, right? And all too frequently completely crap. Yeah. And the thing about that is that contradiction is fine in South Africa, where you've got the best and worst, but it means that what it does is it undermines journalism, and it undermines integrity, and it undermines trust. And then it feeds into broader stereotypes. So think about the Lusikisiki killing, the mass killing of people. Understanding why that happened and what's actually behind that. We're so used to violence in South Africa that we just kind of think, oh, well, another 17 people died. Whoopsie daisy. Like, they had a bad weekend. There was a period recently of weekend clashes again. The last time we saw that kind of terminology being used was in the mid to late 90s, when people were being killed in a low-level civil war in KZN, when every week on Monday, SABC News would start off the headline, 15 people died in weekend clashes, like it was football, right? 5 died here, 6 there, etc. And then ENCA would have a wailing black woman crying as their underlying theme to support that. And I say that because it buys into all of the stereotypes about the media, and then it helps those that are seeking to undermine the media. So you need two of those things to happen. You need media quality to be improved. For that, you need investment. But for that, you need government meaningfully to support. And I wasn't making a dig about the West, but I'm talking about inequitable resources, right? The fact that we need those resources to be supporting organizations that are going to be the bastions of media freedom. Because for all that, we've got our challenges. If you look, I'm so pleased Anton raised the slap thing. Our courts have been at the forefront around protecting media freedom in South Africa. Every instance they've come up trumps, particularly our constitutional court, even on issues like slap suits. They've led the world in access to criminal cases in terms of the open justice issues. So they are leading the world in many respects on these things. But then we need to back that up with support and supporting our news organizations.
I think the first point is to say that stupid people also have a right to speak. And I think that's the reality of having a free society where everyone has an opinion, but it's always important to have strong fact-checking, and also if that information can be debunked, then you have a media that does that. But I think the important thing here is that this coalition is actually a good, noble idea. And I made this point earlier, that we actually need more countries, not just 50. Right? We need more countries buying into it and supporting it. And I'm encouraged by what the Deputy Minister said, although he was careful lest he became like Obed Bapela. I take that DM. So I think it's actually an important one. And I think the more you have governments, and also, I mean, we've got very strong civil society in this country. The more you have governments actually taking up the fight for media freedom, right? We may question them, we may criticize, but the reality is that it's actually a good thing. And if you can have it, because most of the time we're crying out in a deep hole with no one hearing, right? But if you have it at the government-to-government level, also pushed by your embassies or by the diplomatic corps, then it means that there's another area of influence for us as the media where we can nudge somebody to make something happen. So I think that the more we have these conversations, the more we have these coalitions, the reality is that, yes, let's move beyond statements. Let's take more meaningful action. Let's be able to see the action in terms of protecting media rights and actually making sure that we have a sustainable media, not in South Africa, but in Africa and the world.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. All right. The Deputy Minister, I'm going to let you have your last bite. Closing thoughts and commitments made.
Well, thank you very much. I think I'm making a commitment that we will look at joining the coalition. It's a noble cause, as it has been said. But we consider media freedom as an important pillar of our democracy, and we will continue to promote free press, and in all instances where the victimization of journalists rear its ugly head, would be the first one as government to condemn such an attack, but also to ensure that there is action taken against the perpetrators of these hideous acts.
Oh, thank you, DM. Bianca, your final closing thoughts.
Thank you. You said pretty much everything I would have said. I want to maybe, if need be, clarify one more thing. The media freedom and the Media Freedom Coalition strengthening or protecting or advocating media freedom is not about a certain narrative. It's about giving journalists, among others, the right to criticize governments. So it may sound a bit illogic, but as governments, we unite to and collaborate with the NGOs to give the journalists and also anyone else working in media the right to criticize us, because this is important to take better decisions. So governments need to be criticized to really justify their actions, be transparent, and include the voices of people like, you were mentioning it's about the food of the people who are, hit by floods, people who are normally not heard. So this is what it's about. It's not about us, looking for an echo for our government policies, but rather the opposite, to get the enrichment by media freedom and to make sure, media can do what it's supposed to do. And this includes criticizing governments. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much for making time to be part of our panel. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much to Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Kenneth Morolong. Thank you so much to the Director for Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird, the Treasurer for SANEF, as well as the African Editors Forum, Mr. Sibungalwa, as well as Bianca Domath, who's the Head of the Political Department at the German Embassy. I'm Naledi Muleo. Guys, thank you. Give yourselves a warm round of applause. We really appreciated your time. Have a couple of drinks, mingle, have a few chats, and then have yourselves a great week ahead, okay?
Don't jump up yet. Can we give Naledi a huge round of applause, please?
Thank you.
So here, for those of you supporters of independent media, you can see us handing out bags of cash to the people that are speaking, because clearly that's what we do. We're going to need a picture of you all. So in just a moment. Just a quick throw forward to the next few days. Tomorrow is a fabulous session looking at elections. looking at what's happened this year and what we're going to expect in 2026. In the afternoon, we've got a session dealing with mental health and journalists. I think that's pretty much full, so if you haven't registered, it's too late now. But in the evening, we're going to be looking at the thorny issue of hate speech, and it's going to be really cool and fun. We've got fabulous people participating in that, including Advocate Ben Winks, to help us unpack what hate speech looks like. Then, just to end off, I want to thank all of our fabulous partners for this. Thank you very much to our friends at the German Embassy. Thank you to our friends and partners, SANEF, Campaign for Freedom of Expression, SOS, GCIS. They've got a fabulous event on Thursday in the morning. 30 years of democracy, a lot to celebrate and some serious issues to face. And then in the evening on Thursday, also just a quick throw forward then, we are looking at media sustainability. So don't go around. There's a ton of excellent stuff still to come. So thank you very much for being with us. And thank you to all of our partners. We really appreciate it. Oh, wait, I've got to say one thing, apparently. Piriana. Okay, if you're not Gen Z, you don't know what that means. Pretty much like me. Okay, let's get some pictures, please. Let's huddle, let's huddle.
That's it.
Stomachs in, chest out.
That's right.